From the Middle East and Ukraine to immigration and global diplomacy, leaders around the world made a series of significant statements on Thursday. Here's a look at who said what. The United Kingdom's likely next Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, apologized for Labour's initial response to Israel's war on Gaza, admitting that the party got it wrong. Burnham said he understood the anger felt by many people and called for further sanctions against those responsible for violence in the besieged Palestinian territory.
Let me start by saying the unbearable suffering in Gaza is a scar on our collective conscience. It's completely unacceptable that innocent Palestinians, including children, continue to be killed. That there's still a humanitarian crisis with too little aid getting in, and that the Israeli military continues to expand the area it controls in Gaza. We've got to do more to put pressure on the Israeli government. I want to repeat what I've said before about the actions of Hamas and the monstrous October the 7th terror attack, which I condemn as strongly today as I did in the immediate aftermath. I also condemn the increase in appalling anti-Semitic attacks here in the UK and those who seek to divide our communities by targeting Jewish people. Following the Heaton Park synagogue attack in Manchester, I felt firsthand the anxiety in our Jewish community and the very real threat they face. This is unacceptable, and we must continue to stamp out anti-Semitism across the UK. We must also be clear in our criticism of what has happened in Gaza. I know many people feel that at the start of Israel's military action in Gaza, my party didn't get it right, and I am sorry about that. The response has too often not been good enough. We need to do better. Yes, we have taken some important steps. These include recognising the Palestinian state, placing sanctions on Israeli ministers and imposing waves of sanctions on violent settlers and the organisations that support them. I also fully support the restrictions on arms licences to make sure that no British bombs or bullets can be used by the IDF in Gaza or in the West Bank. But let's be honest. The UK was too slow to call for a ceasefire, and we must now do more to strengthen our approach. Israel continues to violate the ceasefire agreement, killing innocent Palestinians. We're seeing a surge in settler violence in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the continued expansion of illegal settlements, displacing Palestinian communities. And Netanyahu's government is clearly attempting to make a two-state solution impossible. That's why we need to do more, which includes looking at further sanctions, both on those involved in the violence in Gaza, but also looking at measures to ban trade in goods with illegal settlements. I, like many people, feel passionately about Gaza, and I will do everything I can to work with international partners to stop the suffering, to ensure the Israeli government adheres to international law, and to keep the prospect of a two-state solution alive, because this is the only way to lasting peace for both Israelis and Palestinians. I have been absolutely appalled by what I've seen and read about the destruction of Gaza. There's increasing evidence that war crimes appear to have been committed. There must be accountability for the depth of the suffering the people of Gaza have experienced. Ultimately, however, it must be for the international courts to determine, rather than politicians. There is no contradiction between a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism and holding the Netanyahu government to account. I will always take a fair and balanced approach and stand up for what is right.
At the UN Security Council, Pakistan urged an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine, calling for dialogue, diplomacy, and the protection of civilians. Ambassador Usman Jadun warned that continued military escalation is deepening the humanitarian crisis and stressed that any lasting peace must be based on the UN Charter and international law.
We meet yet again to deliberate on this conflict which, regrettably, continues to rage. It is deplorable that the overwhelming calls for ending hostilities and pursuing the path of dialogue, both inside and outside of this chamber, remain unheeded. Instead, there is escalation with intensification in attacks by both parties. The sharp uptick in fighting and expansion of the battlefield is not only compounding the humanitarian plight in the affected areas, but is also pushing the parties apart, entrenching mistrust and shrinking political space for dialogue, further diminishing the prospects for peace. President, we reiterate our call for protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure and of humanitarian personnel, and for the parties to abide by their international humanitarian law obligations without any exception. The increasingly dangerous and perilous path that this conflict has taken needs to be reversed. This can only be achieved by investing more in dialogue and diplomacy and not military means. Clearly, the primary responsibility for this rests with the parties. In this context, we again underscore the need for an immediate and complete cessation of hostilities and the resumption of meaningful dialogue in earnest. Mutually acceptable peaceful settlement, consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and corresponding to the legitimate security interests of all sides and the relevant multilateral agreements, remains the only viable path to lasting peace. Pakistan will continue to support all efforts aimed at achieving a just, comprehensive, durable, and full resolution of this conflict. I thank you.
The meeting also heard from UN Political Affairs Chief Rosemary DiCarlo, who said civilian casualties have reached their highest level since the early months of Russia's 2022 invasion.
Mr. President, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights reported that civilian casualties in Ukraine, killed and injured, were higher in May than in any other month since the beginning of the conflict. Preliminary figures for June indicate an even higher toll, with at least 265 people killed and 1,816 injured. This concerning trend is seemingly continuing into July. Any attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, wherever they occur, are a clear violation of international humanitarian law and must stop immediately. In total, since the start of the Russian Federation's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, OHCHR has verified that at least 16,402 civilians, including 802 children, have been killed in Ukraine. 48,428 civilians, including 2,948 children, have been injured. These figures account only for verified casualties. Actual figures are likely significantly higher. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, Russian. Mr. President, the escalation of the war continues to harm civilians living in territories of Ukraine under temporary occupation of the Russian Federation. Inside the Russian Federation, Russian authorities have reported that 250 civilians were killed and 1,596 injured in the Russian Federation in the first 6 months of 2026. The United Nations is not in a position to verify these reports. All efforts to this end.
The United Nations also expressed alarm over the return of violence in and around Iran and the Strait of Hormuz after fresh exchanges between Washington and Tehran. The concern comes after Iranian forces launched attacks on U.S. military infrastructure in Gulf states following American strikes on southern Iran, placing further strain on the fragile ceasefire reached just weeks ago. Mexico to pursue legal action over deaths in U.S. custody.
What is the Secretary General's reaction specifically to the events in the last few hours?
This tit for tat needs to stop, right? A return to diplomacy is urgently needed for the sake of stability in the region, for the sake of global stability. I mean, we keep talking about the impact that this conflict is having on the global economy, and I think all of the parties involved need to understand that the best way to end this conflict is a return to the negotiating table.
And clearly, the MOU is not sticking, it's not holding. From the Secretary General's standpoint, where does he see the UN's role perhaps in the coming days and weeks, given where we've been and given where we're at now?
Well, we're always, the Secretary General has always said that he stands ready to assist in any way that we can.
Report that a coordinated pro-Israel organization.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announced that her government will file criminal complaints in the United States following the deaths of Mexican nationals during U.S. immigration operations. According to Mexican authorities, 14 citizens died while in immigration and customs enforcement custody, while 3 others were killed during arrest operations, prompting Mexico to seek legal accountability.
Información del día de hoy, pasamos a las preguntas. De este lado.
Evitar que sigan sucediendo violaciones de derechos humanos contra los mexicanos en Estados Unidos. ¿Quién va a ir dirigida? ¿Cuándo empezarán a presentar las denuncias? ¿A quién?
Que no podemos ser omisos frente a los mexicanos que han fallecido en operativos de ICE o que estaban detenidos en estos centros de detención que operan empresas privadas contratadas por ICE. Entonces, por eso estamos emprendiendo más acciones. Por supuesto, vamos a estar atentos a ello, internacionales y dentro de Estados Unidos. El gobierno de México está obligado a dar atención consular a todas y a todos los mexicanos que lo soliciten, pero particularmente a mexicanas y mexicanos cuyo único delito es trabajar en los Estados Unidos de manera honesta.
Those were some of the day's most significant statements from world leaders and international organizations. From calls for accountability and diplomacy to renewed concerns over conflict, these remarks reflect the growing challenges shaping the global agenda.